Hello everyone, this is Young from Career School. So today I want to go over one of the leadership principles that we have at Amazon once again. And this one is bias for action. Bias for action is one of the leadership principles that really come up a lot frequently during, just like general interviews, meetings, or anything that we do at Amazon. So I think it's really important that you understand what it is. But at the same time, for me, it was, the leadership principle itself didn't really, like, I wasn't really sure what that it actually meant. So meaning that it's sometimes for someone, it might be harder to interpret what that actually means. But as bias for action actually does come up frequently when you work at Amazon or even when you are doing your RLD interviews or interviews in general, they do come up frequently. So it is one of the really important leadership principles that people should have or people should be preparing for their upcoming interviews quite well. Yeah, so I think it's one of those leadership principles that's really important that you understand. So let's dive in. Yeah, so before we start digging into it, let's go over the actual leadership principle. Bias for action. Speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk taking. Yeah, as you can see, it's about making decisions, making the right decisions, obviously, but also at the same time, making decisions fast. So for me, I think this fast-paced company, fast-paced culture was kind of natural for me working in tech most of my career, actually all of my career. But I think it was really, something that kind of came natural to me. But at the same time, it was a little bit different because I came from a hardware background where most of our business model was just selling, a smartphone to the customers, and that was pretty much it. Versus coming into Amazon where it's more service or the actual customer experience that mattered for the customers, right? So now I'm more of a customer experience, selling that something that does not really exist in, hard physical product. So like transitioning in from hardware to a, software thingy was the part that kind of made me challenging at the beginning. So as you can see, speed matters in business decision making, but also at the same time, it's important that you make the right decisions. So this is one of the things that I really value among a lot of things that I learned at Amazon. But bias for action is probably going to be, top of the list because, when you are looking into bias for action, there's probably going to be two things. One is when someone is needed for something that really lacks ownership or it's kind of blurry in terms of like who owns what, like that's when you show bias for action. You're the first person to, raise your hand and volunteer to do something quick, fast, and make that happen in the right manner. I think that's one piece of bias for action. I think this is pretty straightforward. It's like something that the MBAs or, the culture in corporate USA kind of looks for, someone who can really, volunteer in doing and quickly taking action on things that really need ownership of. I think that's the first part of the bias for action. So I think the other part was probably going to be making the business decision quick and fast and right. And some of the examples can be when your manager is not around, like you have to make that final decision and go, or when the main stakeholders are not around and you basically have to be owning that decision-making process or just like really taking bias for action to call off or sign off on something that usually has to be in a process, right? I think that's probably going to be the trickier part of this whole bias for action thing. So and that would probably be in the realm of when you don't make a decision right away, customers are, going through pain or there's a pain point that customers are facing or there's a cost associated to it. Like these can be those kind of, situations where you are, forced or where you have to make that decisions quick without really consulting with others, or in other words, taking a calculated risk. So in terms of stories that really matches with the bias action, what will be the best story to share when you are asked one of these bias for action questions? Obviously, there's going to be a lot because, as usual, leadership principles, we ask one question, but, behind it, it's like all of these leadership principles are kind of tied together. But I think it's best if you share some story of when you had to make a decision without really consulting with anyone, or did not really have full picture or the data set that you needed to make that final decision. So what are the common questions that you can get during an interview related to bias reaction? Let me go through some of them. And as I usually tell you, these questions, you can Google them, and there's going to be a ton out there as well. So the first one is, give me an example of a calculated risk that you have taken where speed was critical. What was the situation and how did you handle it? What steps did you take to mitigate the risk, and what was the outcome? Second, tell me about a time when you worked against a tight deadline and didn't have time to consider all options before making a decision. How much time did you have? What approach did you take? And what did you learn from the situation? Third, describe a situation where you made an important business decision without consulting with your manager. What was the situation and how did it turn out? What would you have done differently? Yeah, so as you can see from these questions, it's pretty much geared towards, moving fast, making the decision without consulting with anyone, or taking calculated risk when you do not really have the full picture. So those are the interview answers that I would prepare if I were in your shoes. And as always, I want to share my story that I have prepared when I was interviewing a couple of years ago to interview with Amazon. Yeah, so it's a story. So to go over my story, I was working as a product manager at Huawei, I think in 2016, 17 or something. And then we launched this phone called BY. It was a new launch with a new telco, KT. And after launch, my manager actually went out of town. He went back to China to enjoy his time with the family. So it was kind of, all me back then. And then after a few weeks after we launched this phone, we got a lot of complaints from the customers saying that they were not getting notification on the Kakao app. Kakao is basically a WhatsApp of Korea. It's probably the most famous and most used app in entire Korea. It's basically WhatsApp. So yeah, and then I basically started investigating the issue. So I think this was Friday evening or something, but I also noticed that this was happening. So the first thing I did was to kind of call up the engineering team in China and then some folks back in home in Korea. And we had our initial meeting. And going more deeply, I found out that this issue was not only for Kakao, it was actually for all the different apps like Facebook, Instagram, and stuff. So yeah, it was a bigger issue than we initially thought. And the problem was that my manager was out of town. So I was basically had to make all these, judgment calls back then. And after analyzing the root cause, what the engineering team has found out is that this is obviously something that we can work on, but that's a workaround solution, not a long-term solution. And then the long-term solution, the app companies like Facebook's and Kakao's and all that, they had to basically open up a dynamic notification upload or something. So yeah, that was another issue. So what I did was, without my manager, I realized that this can be a big issue with the phones and the customers obviously having that pain point of not getting the notification on their apps. I actually told the engineering team that we have to move fast and then that we have to make that judgment call right now. So told them that we should be working on that workaround solution. And then the engineering team kind of worked all weekend and all that. So we had that new version out on Tuesday to test and then rolled out that actual version on Wednesday. So after that, customer complaints dramatically went down because, obviously we were getting like 50 or something at the beginning, and then it went up to like 100 or something. And then after putting this new software version out on Wednesday, we saw a dramatic decrease in these customer complaints. And I thought it was really important to just, before getting sign off from the manager, to move fast and, solve the customer problem. And at the same time, what I did was to work with the partner companies like Facebook, Kakao, and stuff to make sure that in the long run, we get this solved as well. So I asked support from those companies to open up their dynamic notification settings so that our phones and their apps can be getting those notification batches whenever we update them. So yeah, that was the moral of the story. I mean, obviously we did I did not have my manager with me, but at the end of the day, I think I sticked with what is important for the customers and try to move fast, making that decision without actually consulting with my manager, which in usual case I would have needed to get his sign off for. So yeah. Short-term solution plus a long-term solution for an issue. And then, learnings, I think, I learned that in business, you really need to move quick to make sure that you are fulfilling customers' requests and that you are providing the best customer experience possible. And then obviously in the long run, you will have to find out a way to make things work in a permanent way so that in next incidents, like in the future, these kind of incidents do not happen. Yeah, so that was it for today. I mean, as I said, bias for action is really important, especially if you are doing a RLD interview, a Retail Leadership Development Program interview. Bias for action is one of the most important leadership principle. So I would really strongly suggest that you have a well-crafted story to share with your interviewers. Hope you liked this video. If you have any questions around leadership principle, Amazon, or anything around the channel, leave a comment here, and please subscribe, share with your friends, and like this video if that really helped. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more contents like this. Thank you.